What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and the new Magic comic is really interesting, so I'm curious to see how you guys feel about it. But this is written by Ashley Allen, and this opens up basically with a mutant being drug away to her own impending doom, which is one heck of a way to start a story. One of the other things, too, for those of you guys who read Benjamin Percy's Ghost Rider, this is going to feel very similar to that. But then it picks up with Ilyanna herself, and she says, I used to dwell on what my life would have been like without wasting my childhood in the eternal hellscape of limbo. I hope it might have been something like this: peaceful, idyllic, and bright. A feeling of hope without its preceding sorrow. When I was kidnapped by the demon Belasco, I thought my life was over. He saw my potential and hungered to influence my power. He painted a seed of evil in my soul and forced it to grow. Yet I hoped, and I managed to finally escape, becoming a new mutant and an X-Man. Now, this is something that I want to talk about here for a second, because I know a lot of you guys are aware of Magik, but we've never really talked about her in a meaningful way here on the channel. So I think this is a great opportunity to do that. So in Marvel Comics, with Uncanny X-Men issues 145 to 160 is kind of what I have historically called like the unofficial Magik saga in Marvel, because it really kind of dealt a lot with like Colossus and his sister Ilyanna Rasputin. And the idea behind it was that when Ilyanna was first introduced in Marvel, she was more of just kind of like a way to show the human side of Colossus. And that was really kind of it. But one of the big kickers about this is that Colossus himself never really had any kind of like horrible, tragic incidences in like the modern age of his life that could be built on to kind of build his character up as an X-Man. Most everybody else did, right? Wolverine has his whole entire history, and you guys don't need me to go into that. Jean Grey lost her friend Annie. Cyclops is effectively an orphan alongside his brother Alex, and it goes on and on and on. But when it came to Colossus, things weren't really that bad. And so writer Chris Claremont changed that. And what he did is, starting in Uncanny X-Men 145, there was a character named Miss Locke, and that she had essentially kidnapped Ilyanna alongside a few other people in order to blackmail the X-Men into rescuing the villain Arcade. And that's where things kicked off, because Ilyanna was brought over to the States, and she essentially stayed alongside Colossus. That goes into her being kidnapped by the demon Belasco. Now, one of the things I want to specify here when it comes to the Realm of Limbo, that is not to be confused with the realm of limbo that Immortus occupies. That place is outside all space and time. The demonic limbo actually resides in the center of the archipelago. And for those of you guys who don't know what that means, the archipelagos in Marvel Comics are kind of like a crossroads of dimensions, usually demonic in nature, that can all be accessed from Earth. And that limbo has the direct ability to oversee places like the Splinter Realms and the Dark Dimension. For those of you guys who don't know the similarities between the two, the Dark Dimension was at one point a large cohesive place. And then somewhere along the line, it basically shattered, right? There was some kind of a conflict and it literally splintered apart. And so what we call the Dark Dimension is just like the biggest section of the splintering realms. And that's where like Dormammu and his sister Umar and the Mindless Ones reside. But the other dimensions of the Splinter Realms are where you get guys like Mephisto and so on and so forth. But again, with Ilyanna being whisked over to this place, much in the same way of what you saw with like Loki or Deadpool and Wolverine, where people were just kind of like dropped off in the pit or whatever that place was called, right? Just the other dimensional landfill of the multiverse. For lack of a better word, the dimension of limbo was very similar to that, in the sense that when Ilyanna was there, she actually came across a version of Storm and other members of the X-Men who were stuck there from a different reality. And that during her time there, Storm became a kind of surrogate mother for Ilyanna and taught her a lot about the nature of magic, specifically because Storm was a protege of Belasco, kind of against her will, and then passed her knowledge on to Ilyanna with the hope that Ilyanna would one day be able to either escape or, better yet, destroy Belasco. And so eventually Storm ends up dying and Ilyanna has to be the one to kill her and different things like that. But the nature of Limbo itself is that it's a place of testing. It is brutal and it is harsh. And even Ilyanna herself constantly experienced abuse at the hands of the demon Nassim. So she had an incredibly hard life in that place, and it turned her into a very dark person. So much so that through a combination of her abuse and the manipulation of the Bloodstones, she developed the Dark Child persona. Now, the nature of the Bloodstones are a little more in-depth than we're going to go into this video, because they involve things like the Life Seed Tree and the Alpha and Omega Stones, and some group of beings that seem to predate all existence and somehow created the Blood Gems, and so on and so forth. The important thing is this: Belasco was systematically corrupting the very essence of Ilyanna and creating Bloodstones with the intention of opening dimensional portals. Because with Ilyanna arriving from Earth, she was almost kind of an anchor to the main Marvel universe. And so if he can create Bloodstones out of her very essence, he can open portals to the main Marvel universe and then invade it. Such as it was, Ilyanna momentarily escaped and then traveled back to the dimension of Limbo in order to defeat Belasco, while simultaneously wielding the Soul Sword, which is quite literally a weapon made out of a combination of her own magic and her own soul. And the more she used it, the more powerful it became, and the more it became intertwined with the very essence of her, right? Hence the reason, the Soul Sword. But again, Ilyanna Rasputin's magic is a combination of a variety of magics, black magic and all kinds of different stuff. She is at her most powerful in Limbo, and in fact, when she's there, she's the most powerful being in that dimension. But when she's on Earth, she's a really, really powerful sorceress, but she's not on the same level as someone like Doctor Strange, right? But she is still incredibly capable. But again, in the middle of this dream sequence that she's having, right, where she's talking to her brother and imagining what life could have been like, she's suddenly visited by her Dark Child persona. And that is something to also kind of address here. One of the big misconceptions that people have when it comes to Dark Child is that it's almost like this Bruce Banner Incredible Hulk type of thing, right? That when Ilyanna Rasputin loses control, she turns into the Dark Child, and the Dark Child does its own thing. It's similar to that, but different at the same time. A better analogy here would be like if Bruce Banner's rage existed in a physical form, kind of like how the Incredible Hulk does. But instead of turning into the Incredible Hulk, and the Incredible Hulk has his own persona, that Bruce Banner just becomes every bit as strong as the Incredible Hulk, and still speaking as himself, right? I'm Bruce Banner, I'm really pissed off. It's just like going through a rage, that kind of thing. And that's how Dark Child works. It's a very, very thin line of nuance between her and the Incredible Hulk, but there is a difference nonetheless. The best way to look at Dark Child is kind of like a physical manifestation of all the abuse and corruption through the Bloodstones that Ilyanna Rasputin basically endured as a child, right? Her demonic version. And so she suddenly wakes up out of this dream out in Merle, Alaska. Because again, for those of you guys who haven't really been following the X-Men mythos, after Krakoa, the X-Men basically took off to Alaska, and they've just kind of been hanging out there ever since, because Xavier doesn't lead the team anymore. He's in prison. But the crazy thing here is, of course, everybody throws a party for Ilyanna, that sort of thing. But the fact is, she doesn't really stay there anymore. The reason why is because when it came to Ilyanna, and specifically due to her time in Limbo, even when she came back as a much older version of herself, she was never really quite the same. And because the place was such an incredibly harsh place and she had to kill in order to survive, it changed her fundamentally. And so by and large, ever since that time in Marvel, she's always been a part of the X-Men, but separate at the same time, kind of doing her own thing, very similar to like Wolverine and Gambit occasionally. And so what she ends up telling everybody is she's got more important things to check out, specifically the fact that mutants have been vanishing in Juneau, Alaska. And so when she shows back up there, there's a lot of anti-mutant sentiment that's going on at this point in time. Now, again, this is one of those aspects of the X-Men mythos where, like we covered with the Storm comic, there's an event in Oklahoma, Storm reveals the truth that a mutant caused it, and so society starts turning against mutants. That's kind of happening all over the place in a variety of different ways. Specifically in this town of Juneau, these demons are invading the entirety of this town. Now, they're only taking mutants away, but innocent people are kind of being caught as collateral damage. And so again, because they're hunting after mutants, humanity believes it's the fault of mutants. And so these townspeople are turning against the mutant population. So much so that like one of the things that happens is they actually just like start trying to feed these demons to mutants, right? They're just like, if they're here for the mutants, just let them take the mutants, right? And the rest of us will just be fine. But again, Ilyanna Rasputin, being a practitioner of magic and a mutant herself, with the ability to create her stepping stones, basically teleportation discs, she's not going to allow that to happen. And it's one of these kind of funny things that goes on here because Ilyanna was always a character who was quick to clap back, and she was one of those who would just sort of leave you to your own fate, right? If you pushed her to that point. And that's why she makes the statement. She's like, so I know you guys don't want mutants here. Do you want me to leave? Or do you want my help? Because I'm fine with either one. I don't mind letting these demons tear this entire town apart. And honestly, there'll be a kind of glorification in watching you guys relish in the situation you made for yourself. And they're like, no, 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 no. We could definitely use your help. And she's like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought. And then at that point, Ilyanna starts getting to work because in this kind of moment right now, right, her killing demons, this is right in her wheelhouse, right? It's the thing she's the best at doing because she did it all the time when she was in the realm of limbo. But there's also a kind of prodigiousness to the way that she handles herself, simultaneously killing demons while opening these stepping discs and teleporting the innocent people away. Now, much like Nightcrawler, right, when he teleports through the Brimstone dimension to get to another location, you cannot use the stepping discs of Ilyanna Rasputin without first passing through the realm of limbo. It's a momentary thing, right? Just probably within the blink of an eye or a couple blinks or something like that, right? Like a few seconds. But you'll see limbo when you pass through. It is absolutely no different than the realm of hell, right? How Judeo-Christianity describes hell. And so in that moment, when these individual people are whisked away, again, one of these guys is just kind of like, let them take the mutant, right? But of course, that leads to Ilyanna basically rescuing this girl, traveling through one of her stepping discs. And when she arrives at this kind of cemetery to a degree, there's this little kid who's crying there, right? And she's like, oh, it's okay. You know, I'm going to take care of you. Everything's going to be fine. And they're like, you're really here to help me? Well, since you so kindly offered, and then like he manifests into like this full-on adult guy. Now, I'm not familiar with this guy from Marvel Comics, and as much as I've poked around, I can't seem to find anything about them. He seems to be demonic in nature and isn't really even the main enemy here, but serves on behalf of a higher power. I will say this though, man, this villain is absolutely being pulled by inspirations from anime. And the reason why is because this dude just like says the things that happen, right? Like he points a gun at you and then whatever he says happens is exactly what happens. Again, relative to the abilities of a gun. But he says, I do only need one more mutant to break the seal. You won't run like the others, will you? They fell for my tricks, but a challenge would be a fitting end to my work. I wish you could be able to glimpse what's beyond his chains, but unfortunately, you won't have the chance to see it. And again, that's when a kind of giant magical pentagram of sorts unfolds here. And it's essentially a seal that's being activated by the blood of Ilyanna. And that's where she kind of claps back, right? Like, do you want a challenge? I'd be more than happy to oblige. But again, he fires a bullet and says burst. And the bullet literally explodes and then showers Ilyanna with all these little fragments. It's like the most anime thing. It's like a Demon Slayer thing, right? Like she's fighting an upper ranked demon. No pun intended even. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's where this guy was pulled from. It's pretty dope. But again, there's this old woman who shows up out of nowhere. Now, it's not Agatha Harkness. Instead, it's a local townswoman named Ren. And she was kind of watching everything unfold when Ilyanna was fighting off against the demons in the town. And she kept saying things like, you know, he's almost here and so on and so forth. So clearly she seemed to know what was going on. And that's exactly what she indicates here. She's like, no, it can't be. When I saw her in town, I feared the worst. To now see her at this grave, we need to strengthen the seal before it falls. Any more energy sacrificed, and Liminal is free. And that's where her grandson's like, what in the world are you talking about, right? Like, you're speaking absolute nonsense. But again, this woman knows something. She says, if the girl is here, that means two prophecies are colliding. Neither can be fulfilled. Centuries ago, our ancestors placed 5 seals to trap the entity known as Liminal. If all 5 break, his chaos will be released onto the world. And that's when she tells her grandson, get to the seal. Now, when it comes to everything with Magik, she's facing off against this guy as best she can, but she is in a lot of ways outclassed because he is a seemingly unique threat that is beyond her ability to face off against, but it's not entirely due to his level of power. That, truth to tell, when Ilyanna becomes the Dark Child, she becomes a lot more powerful. Now, she's far more extreme, she's brutal, and it's very easy for Ilyanna to lose herself in this sort of corruption, right, that she experiences. But nonetheless, if we're doing a kind of side-by-side comparison here, I would say that Ilyanna, more often than not, is weaker than her Dark Child persona. And even when this other young mutant tries to step up and defeat this demon, nothing happens. And in fact, he just like destroys this girl on the spot, seemingly burns her alive, right? Probably using some kind of version of hellfire or something along those lines, crushing her head. But again, when that happens, that's when the Dark Child persona starts to take over, right? Poor, pathetic Ilyanna was holding us back. Worth it for your silly little morals. What will you do now? Who else will you let die? Again, feeding on the uncertainty and the anger of Ilyanna. And that's what Dark Child does. It feeds on her kind of weakened and vulnerable emotional states and draws itself closer and closer in an effort to completely and totally take over. And if Ilyanna is not vigilant, she'll lose herself to this corruption, right? She'll lose herself to her darker side. And that's kind of what starts to happen. She goes back on the attack again, but again, she's fighting mindlessly. She's fighting just kind of brutally and not really keeping herself. And that's when you switch back over to Ren, right? She says, we need the physical to bind it. Grab the vetiver I keep in my bag. And like her grandson has no clue what's going on here. But again, she's just like, grab the green plant in the front pocket. And she says, that beast has collected enough energy. These wards will be the only thing to stop the seal from failing. I do not know if the other four have already been destroyed. Our family was charged with protecting this seal. That duty was to pass to you when you came of age, once you could be trained in our society's ways, to be entrusted with preventing the apocalypses that plague our world. It is not fair to you, Cal. I thought I had more time to explain, to give you a childhood. I do not know what will happen today, but remember this. Be wary of that woman. You cannot trust the Dark Child. And that's true. You can never trust the Dark Child persona of Ilyanna. And so again, because Ilyanna's emotions are getting the better of her, right? She's saying things like, I will make you suffer. And that's where Dark Child's like, we will make him pay. Dark Child says, he will just be the beginning. And Ilyanna says, nothing will hold me back. And Dark Child says, nothing will hold us back. Again, edging closer and closer, ever closer. And that's why Dark Child says, get closer, Ilyanna, let me take over. Give me your burden. And that's where Ren chimes in and is like, you have magic, don't you? Quit swinging your sword like some blunt object, having no finesse whatsoever. You have magic, learn to use your magic. And that brings Ilyanna back. She's like, that is true, right? And she kind of centers herself and keeps the Dark Child persona at bay. She says, if he wields magic, let me do the same. And she casts a spell that says silence, and it takes away his ability to cast spells. And she's like, remove the verbal component to the spell. So whenever he says anything, nothing happens, right? He goes to use his weapon and that's it. A kind of silence cast around this entire area. Spells don't seemingly get used by either of them, right? Then she says, neutralize the threat. Cuts this guy's arm off and he loses his gun. And then again, he tries to go back and fire it and he says, this is infuriating. I tire of these games. Your family will imprison my master no longer. And again, when he fires the gun, it says burst and it kills Ren on the spot, right? This old woman dies. Now, of course, the spell is cast. And so seemingly for a moment, the seal is maintained. It does not appear to be broken. But then it turns out that it is. And like this guy, Liminal, starts to manifest from this demonic realm right when Ilyanna opens a stepping disc and gets them out. And then at that point, it's just a matter of trying to keep this sort of evil contained to this one particular spot. And it works, right? Between a spell that she casts and the fact that Liminal is essentially retreating and kind of consolidating itself, it gives Ilyanna a chance to talk to the grandson, of course, whose name is Cal. And initially, Ilyanna's like, this is all my fault, right? That I wasn't thinking, I let things get out of control. And he says, no, I mean, it is your fault, 100%. Like, you totally screwed up here. but it's also my family's burden, right? Apparently, my family has a history of keeping some incredibly powerful demonic entity named Liminal locked away. And so now it's my charge. And I don't trust you. My grandmother told me to never trust the Dark Child. And I've known her longer than I've known you, so I trust her and I don't trust you. So you can come along with me, but I'm by no standard of measurement handing this over to you. Not at all. And so again, the last little tidbit you get is this demonic entity that kind of sees a sort of pamphlet of sorts, right? And it says the Dark Child. So that's her name. How interesting. Will she pose a threat or become a gift? No matter, we'll have fun either way. Because when it comes to the Dark Child, you never know what it is she's going to do. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. Again, Ilyanna's stories have always kind of been a little wonky and a little bit janky, but they've always been fun. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.